All right, everyone, let's settle down. Today we're diving into the opening of Richard Dawkins' book, The Greatest Show on Earth. Now, Dawkins is a pretty famous evolutionary biologist, and in this first chapter, he isn't just teaching biology, he's making a case for why we even bother to study it as a proven fact. He starts out with a bit of a what-if scenario. Imagine you're a history teacher trying to teach about the Roman Empire, but you're constantly interrupted by people claiming the Romans never existed and that Latin just sprang into being recently. That's how he feels science teachers feel today when they try to teach evolution. He actually calls people who deny evolution history deniers, or 40%ers, because according to some polls, about 40% of Americans believe humans were created in their present form within the last 10,000 years. The big hurdle he wants to clear right away is the phrase, "It's only a theory." You've probably heard that before, right? Dawkins argues that this is a huge misunderstanding of how we use the word theory. He points out that the dictionary actually has two very different meanings for it. Sense one, a system of ideas that explains a group of facts and has been confirmed by observation or experiment. Think of the heliocentric theory, the fact that the Earth orbits the Sun. Sense two, a mere hypothesis, a guess, or conjecture. When scientists talk about the theory of evolution, they're using sense one. To make this clearer, Dawkins actually proposes a new word, theorem, spelled with a U to distinguish it from mathematical theorem. He defines a theorem as a scientific theory that is so well supported by evidence that it's an undisputed fact in any ordinary sense of the word. Now, some people might say, but you weren't there to see it happen. Dawkins has a great response to that. He argues that scientific inference can actually be more reliable than your own eyes. He mentions a famous experiment where people were told to count basketball passes on a video, and they were so focused that the majority of them completely missed a man in a gorilla suit walking right through the middle of the game. His point is that eyewitnesses are fallible, but the traces left behind are much harder to fake. He uses the metaphor of a detective arriving at a crime scene. Even though the detective didn't see the murder happen, they have fingerprints, footprints, and DNA evidence. In the same way, biologists look at the traces left in our DNA and in the fossil record. He wraps up by saying that the evidence for evolution is beyond reasonable doubt. It's not a guess. It's a fact in the same way it's a fact that Paris is in the northern hemisphere. For Dawkins, evolution is a theorem, a beautiful, simple, and inescapable truth about life on Earth.
All right, everyone, let's settle down. Today, we're going to look at a literal clash of the titans in the world of science and philosophy. On one side, we have Richard Dawkins, probably the most famous evolutionary biologist and atheist in the world, sometimes called Darwin's Rottweiler for how fiercely he defends his views. On the other side, we have Jonathan Sarfati, a Ph.D. scientist and national chess champion who can play 12 people at once while blindfolded. The debate we're diving into today is over Dawkins' 2009 book, The Greatest Show on Earth, and Sarfati's point-by-point rebuttal, The Greatest Hoax on Earth. This isn't just a fight about fossils. It's a fight about logic, definitions, and how we know what's true. 1. The definitional bait-and-switch. The first thing Sarfati tackles is how Dawkins defines evolution. In his book, Dawkins says evolution is simply a systematic increase or decrease in the frequency with which we see a particular gene in a gene pool. Now, on the surface, that sounds fine. But Sarfati calls this a bait-and-switch, or equivocation. Here's why. If evolution is just genes changing over time, then Sarfati says, sign me up. I'm an evolutionist. Creationists actually believe that species change, and that new species can form within certain kinds. The bait is using a definition everyone agrees on, like dogs changing over time. The switch is using that to prove the general theory of evolution, GT, the idea that all life on Earth came from a single inorganic source, essentially, particles to people. Sarfati argues that Dawkins spends most of his time proving the bait, while pretending he has proven the switch. 2. Is it only a theory? You've probably heard people say, evolution is just a theory. Dawkins hates that. He argues that in science, a theory isn't a guess, it's a well-supported explanation, like the theory of gravity. To fix this, Dawkins proposed a new word, theorem, with a U. He says a theorem is a scientific theory that is so well supported by evidence that common sense should treat it as an undisputed fact, just like the fact that the Earth is round. Sarfati's response is interesting. He points out that we can see the Earth is round right now with satellites, but evolution is a claim about the unobserved and unrepeatable past. He argues that while operational science, like chemistry, happens in a lab where you can repeat experiments, historical science, like the origin of life, is more like a detective trying to reconstruct a crime scene. You weren't there to see it happen. 3. The 4 unsolved mysteries. One of the most surprising parts of the sources is that Dawkins himself admits there are massive gaps in the evolutionary story. He calls them unsolved mysteries. The origin of life. Dawkins calls this a complete mystery. He has no materialistic explanation for how life first kick-started from non-living chemicals. The origin of sex. Why do we need 2 parents? In evolutionary terms, sexual reproduction is a huge puzzle because it's not strictly necessary for survival. Consciousness. Dawkins says the origin of subjective consciousness is the biggest puzzle facing biology. Morality. Why are humans so altruistic? Why do we do good things for people we don't even know? Dawkins suggests it might just be a mistaken misfiring of our brain circuits. Sarfati argues that these aren't just small details to be worked out. They are the foundation of the whole system, and if the foundation is a mystery, the rest of the house is on shaky ground. 4. Axioms. What is your starting point? Finally, let's talk about axioms. An axiom is a starting assumption you accept without proof. Dawkins' axiom: atheism and materialism. He assumes from the start that there is no design and no purpose, only blind, pitiless indifference. Sarfati's axiom: the Bible is true. He argues that science actually started because of the biblical view that a God of order created a universe that follows laws. Sarfati points out that even Dawkins' fellow atheists sometimes find his approach problematic. One famous philosopher, Michael Ruse, said Dawkins' work is bad academics and that his new atheism is a disaster because it's so arrogant. Another critic said reading Dawkins on theology is like reading someone talk about biology when their only source is the Book of British Birds. The big takeaway: the debate between these 2 men isn't just about who has more data. It's about how you interpret that data based on your starting assumptions. Sarfati's goal with his book is to show that when you strip away the bait-and-switch tactics and the straw-man arguments, the evidence for evolution isn't as solid as Dawkins wants you to believe. Whether you agree with the greatest show or the greatest hoax, the lesson here is to look past the rhetoric. Don't just listen to the loudest voice. Look at the logic, check the definitions, and ask yourself what starting assumptions are being used to build the argument. All right, that's our deep dive for today. Make sure you've got those definitions down, especially theorem and equivocation, because we'll be using them in our next lab. Class dismissed.